I never thought I'd be sitting here telling you this story. My hands are still shaking as I type this, and honestly, I'm not even sure where to begin. But I need to get this out, because what happened to me 3 weeks ago changed everything I thought I knew about family, trust, and the lengths people will go to prove a point. If you're someone who's ever felt dismissed, forgotten, or treated like you don't matter because of your age, please stick around. And if this story resonates with you, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button. My name's Margaret, and I'm new to sharing my story online, but I have a feeling you'll want to hear how this all plays out. It started on a Tuesday morning in October. I remember because it was my late husband's birthday, and I was feeling particularly emotional. Robert would have been 78 that day, and even though he'd been gone for 2 years, I still felt his absence like a physical ache in my chest. I was sitting in my kitchen, staring at the empty chair where he used to read his morning paper, when my phone rang. It was my daughter-in-law, Jessica. Now, I need to give you some context here. Jessica married my son Michael 8 years ago, and from day one, she's had this attitude toward me. It's subtle, the kind of thing that makes you question whether you're imagining it or if it's really happening. Little comments about how I repeat stories, how I sometimes forget where I put my keys, how I ask the same questions twice during phone calls. She'd smile when she said these things, but there was always this undertone, this suggestion that I was losing my mind. The thing is, I'm 73 years old, and yes, sometimes I forget things. Don't we all? But Jessica seemed to catalog every single instance, like she was building a case. She'd exchange these looks with Michael when I'd tell a story they'd heard before, or when I'd call to check if they were still coming for dinner after we'd already confirmed it. Michael, bless his heart, would just shrug it off, but I could see the seeds of doubt she was planting. So when Jessica called that Tuesday morning, her voice unusually sweet and concerned, I should have known something was up. "Margaret," she said, "I was thinking about you today, and I realized we haven't spent much one-on-one time together lately. Would you like to take a little road trip with me? I'm driving up to visit my sister in Portland, and I thought it might be nice to have some company." I was surprised, honestly. Jessica had never expressed interest in spending time alone with me before, but I was feeling lonely, missing Robert, and the idea of getting out of the house seemed appealing. "That sounds lovely, dear," I told her. "When were you thinking?" "Actually, I was hoping we could leave today. I know it's short notice, but my schedule just opened up, and I really want to make this happen." Her voice had this urgent quality that I couldn't quite place, but I attributed it to enthusiasm. I should have trusted my instincts. 3 hours later, Jessica picked me up in her silver SUV. She was dressed casually, which struck me as odd since she usually dressed up even for grocery shopping, but I didn't think too much of it. She had coffee for both of us and a bag of snacks, and she seemed genuinely excited about our trip. We chatted about the weather, about Michael's new promotion at work, about her sister's new baby. Normal conversation, nothing that would have prepared me for what was coming. About 2 hours into the drive, Jessica started testing me. It was subtle at first. She'd mention something we'd talked about earlier and then act confused when I didn't remember the exact details. "Oh, I thought I told you about Karen's new job," she'd say, when I was certain she hadn't mentioned anyone named Karen. Or she'd reference a conversation we'd supposedly had about her mother's health, when I was positive we'd never discussed her mother at all. I started to feel unsettled, like I was losing my grip on reality. Had I forgotten these conversations? Was my memory really that bad? Jessica seemed so certain, so confident in her recollections, that I began to doubt myself. This is what gaslighting feels like, though I wouldn't recognize it as such until much later. We stopped for lunch at a small diner off the highway. Jessica excused herself to use the restroom, and I could hear her talking on the phone, though I couldn't make out the words. When she came back, she seemed different, more tense, more focused. She barely touched her food and kept checking her phone. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Oh yes, everything's fine," she said, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I just want to make sure we stay on schedule." Back in the car, the questioning intensified. Jessica started asking me about things that had happened years ago, then acting concerned when I couldn't remember every detail. "Margaret, are you feeling all right? You seem a bit confused today." She'd say this with such false concern that it made my skin crawl, but I was starting to genuinely worry that something was wrong with me. The sun was starting to set when we pulled into a rest stop. It was one of those large highway rest areas with multiple buildings, vending machines, and plenty of parking spaces. Jessica parked near the back, away from the main buildings. "I need to stretch my legs," she said. "Want to walk around a bit?" I was tired, and my back was aching from sitting so long, so I agreed. We walked around the facility, and Jessica continued her subtle interrogation. She asked me about my first job, my wedding day, the hospital where Michael was born. When I couldn't remember specific details about events that had happened 50 years ago, she'd shake her head with that same false concern. "I think we should call Michael," she said finally. "I'm worried about you, Margaret. You seem really confused today." That's when I realized we were standing next to her car and she was holding her keys. But instead of getting in, she started walking toward the building. "I'm just going to use the restroom quickly," she said. "Wait here." I stood there for maybe 5 minutes before I realized something was wrong. Jessica had been gone too long, and when I looked around, I couldn't see her anywhere. I walked to the women's restroom and called her name. No answer. I checked the visitor center, the vending machine area, even walked around the entire building. She was nowhere to be found. That's when I saw it, or rather, didn't see it. Her silver SUV was gone. The parking space where we'd been standing was empty. Jessica had left me, at a highway rest stop, in the middle of nowhere, as the sun was setting. I stood there in complete shock for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. This couldn't be real. My daughter-in-law wouldn't just abandon me at a rest stop. There had to be an explanation. Maybe she'd gone to get gas and forgot to tell me. Maybe she'd had an emergency and would come back for me. But deep down, I knew the truth. This had been planned. The whole day, the questions, the fake concern about my memory. It had all been leading to this moment. Jessica had brought me here to prove a point, to demonstrate that I was too confused and helpless to take care of myself. I tried calling Michael, but my phone battery was almost dead. I'd forgotten to charge it the night before. Ironic, considering what Jessica was trying to prove about my memory. I managed to get through to him, but the call kept cutting out. All I could say was, "Michael, I'm at a rest stop. Jessica left me," before the line went dead. The panic was starting to set in. It was getting dark, I was alone, and I had no way to get home. I was 3 hours from my house, in a place I'd never been before, with no transportation and a dead phone. For the first time in my life, I felt truly helpless. But then, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was thinking about Robert, about how he'd always taught me to be strong and resourceful. Maybe it was the sheer audacity of what Jessica had done. But instead of falling apart, I got angry. Not just upset, furious. This woman had manipulated me, gaslit me, and then abandoned me to prove some twisted point about my mental capacity. Well, if she wanted to test my memory and my ability to handle a crisis, she was about to get more than she bargained for. I went into the visitor center and explained my situation to the staff. The woman behind the counter, whose name tag read Linda, was incredibly kind. She let me use their phone to call Michael back, and when I explained what had happened, I could hear the shock in his voice. "Mom, that can't be right," he said. "Jessica would never do that. Maybe there's been a misunderstanding." "Michael," I said, my voice steady despite the circumstances, "your wife brought me here, spent all day questioning my memory, and then deliberately left me at this rest stop. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was calculated." Linda offered to call the police, but I asked her to wait. I had an idea that was forming in my mind, and I wanted to see if Jessica would come back on her own. I also asked Linda if I could use their computer to check something online. She was hesitant at first, but when I explained what had happened, she agreed to help. I spent the next hour researching Jessica's social media accounts, something I'd never done before. What I found made my blood run cold. She had been documenting what she called my memory issues for months. Photos of me looking confused, videos of me repeating stories, posts about how difficult it was to watch a loved one's mental decline. She had been building a narrative about my incompetence, and today was supposed to be the grand finale. But here's what Jessica didn't know about me. I may be 73 years old, but I worked in public relations for 35 years before I retired. I know how to handle a crisis, how to control a narrative, and how to make sure the truth comes out. She had picked the wrong person to mess with. Michael arrived at the rest stop around 10 o'clock that night. He was frantic, apologetic, and furious with Jessica. She had told him that I'd gotten confused and wandered off, and that she was looking for me. She claimed she'd been driving around for hours, searching. It was only when Michael called the police to report me missing that Jessica suddenly found me at the rest stop. The ride home was tense. Michael kept apologizing, saying he couldn't believe Jessica would do such a thing. But I could see the doubt in his eyes, the way he'd glance at me in the rearview mirror. Jessica had been working on him for years, and part of him wondered if maybe I really had gotten confused and forgotten that she'd told me she was leaving. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Jessica get away with this. I wasn't going to let her convince everyone that I was losing my mind. And I wasn't going to let her use me as a prop in her twisted game. I was going to fight back, and I was going to do it in a way that would make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of person she really was. The next morning, I started making phone calls. I called my lawyer, my doctor, and my old contacts from my PR days. I also called someone I hadn't spoken to in years, my former colleague Rachel, who now worked as a producer for a local morning show. Rachel and I had stayed in touch sporadically over the years, and when I told her what had happened, she was outraged. "Margaret, this is elder abuse," she said. "What she did to you is unconscionable. And you're right, this needs to be exposed. People need to know that this kind of manipulation happens." Rachel agreed to help me tell my story, but we both knew we needed proof. That's where Linda from the rest stop became crucial. She had security cameras, and she agreed to provide the footage that showed Jessica abandoning me. We also had the timeline from Jessica's own social media posts, which didn't match her story about searching for me. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Michael, feeling guilty about doubting me, had confronted Jessica about what happened. Their argument was loud enough that their neighbor heard it, and Jessica admitted to leaving me at the rest stop intentionally. She said she wanted to prove that I couldn't take care of myself, that I needed to be in a care facility, and that Michael was in denial about my condition. What Jessica didn't know was that Michael was recording the conversation on his phone. He'd started recording their arguments months earlier because Jessica had a habit of denying things she'd said. When he played me the recording, I finally understood the full scope of her manipulation. "She's becoming a burden, Michael." Jessica's voice was clear on the recording. "She calls us constantly. She repeats the same stories. She can't remember simple things. And you just enable her. Someone needs to make you see that she's not capable of living alone anymore." "So you left her at a rest stop?" Michael's voice was incredulous. "I knew she'd be fine. There were people around. It was safe. But I wanted her to experience what it would be like to be truly lost and confused. Maybe then she'd realize she needs help." "Jesus, Jessica, she's my mother. And she's holding you back, holding us back. We can't have kids with her constantly needing attention. We can't travel. We can't live our lives because you're always worried about Margaret." This was supposed to be a wake-up call. Listening to that recording was like being punched in the gut. This woman had been systematically undermining me for years, all because she saw me as an obstacle to her perfect life with my son. She had been planning to use that day at the rest stop as evidence that I was incompetent, that I needed to be institutionalized or at least stripped of my independence. Rachel and I spent the next week preparing for the television interview. We gathered all the evidence, the security footage, the social media posts, the recording of Jessica's confession. We also had my medical records, which showed that I was in good health with no signs of dementia or cognitive decline. My doctor was willing to go on record stating that while I might have normal age-related memory changes, I was fully capable of living independently. The interview was scheduled for the following Monday. Rachel had titled the segment, "When Family Becomes the Enemy, A Mother's Fight Against Elder Abuse." The show had promoted it heavily, calling it a shocking story of family betrayal and manipulation. Jessica had no idea what was coming. She'd been avoiding me since the rest stop incident, and Michael had been staying at a hotel while he figured out what to do about his marriage. She thought she'd won, that she'd successfully planted enough doubt about my mental state to get her way. The morning of the interview, I woke up early and put on my best blue dress. The one Robert had always said brought out my eyes. I did my hair and makeup carefully, wanting to look as composed and competent as possible. I knew this was my chance to set the record straight, to show the world who Jessica really was. Rachel picked me up at 8 in the morning, and we drove to the studio together. She had warned me that the interview might be emotional, that Jessica would likely try to defend herself and attack my credibility. I was prepared for that. What I wasn't prepared for was the ambush. When we arrived at the studio, Jessica was already there. She was sitting in the green room, looking perfectly composed in a conservative navy suit. She had her own producer with her, and when she saw me, she smiled that same fake smile I'd seen so many times before. "Margaret," she said, standing up as if to hug me. "I'm so glad you're here. I think this is exactly what we need, a chance to clear the air and get you the help you need." That's when I realized what was happening. Jessica thought she was the one being interviewed. She thought this was her opportunity to publicly demonstrate my incompetence, to show the world that I was a confused old woman who couldn't be trusted. She had no idea that I was the one telling the story. Rachel handled the situation beautifully. She explained to Jessica that this was actually my interview, that I would be sharing my version of events. Jessica's composure cracked for just a moment. I saw the flash of panic in her eyes, but she quickly recovered. "Of course," she said. "I'm happy to be here to support Margaret and help clarify any confusion she might have about what happened." The interview started with Rachel introducing me and explaining the basic facts of what had happened. Then she turned to me and asked me to tell my story. I looked directly into the camera and began to speak. 3 weeks ago, my daughter-in-law Jessica invited me on what I thought was a bonding trip. Instead, she spent the entire day questioning my memory, making me doubt my own recollections, and then deliberately abandoned me at a highway rest stop to prove that I was incompetent. I saw Jessica shift uncomfortably in her chair, but I continued. I told the entire story, from the phone call that morning to standing alone in the parking lot as the sun set. I explained how Jessica had been documenting my supposed memory issues on social media, how she'd been building a case for my incompetence. When I finished, Rachel turned to Jessica. "What's your response to these allegations?" Jessica's media training kicked in. She worked in marketing, so she knew how to handle difficult questions. "I'm deeply concerned about Margaret's version of events," she said, her voice full of false sympathy. "This is exactly what I've been trying to tell my husband. Margaret is confused. She's mixing up facts. She's not remembering things correctly. I would never abandon anyone, especially not my husband's mother." That's when Rachel played the recording. Jessica's own voice filled the studio. I wanted her to experience what it would be like to be truly lost and confused. Maybe then she'd realize she needs help. The color drained from Jessica's face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Rachel let the recording play for several more seconds, including the part where Jessica admitted that she saw me as a burden who was holding her and Michael back. "This is your voice, isn't it, Jessica?" Rachel asked. Jessica's lawyer. Yes, she'd brought a lawyer. Started to object, but Jessica held up her hand. Something had changed in her expression. The mask had finally slipped completely. "Yes," she said quietly. "That's my voice." "So you admit that you deliberately left Margaret at the rest stop?" Jessica looked at me for a long moment. I could see the calculation in her eyes, the way she was trying to figure out how to minimize the damage. But she was trapped, and she knew it. Yes, I left her there, but only for a few minutes. I wanted her to realize how scary it could be to be alone and confused. I wanted her to understand that she needs help. "You left a 73-year-old woman alone at a highway rest stop for 3 hours, Rachel said. "How is that helping her?" "I was trying to protect my husband," Jessica said, her voice getting stronger. "Margaret calls us constantly. She repeats the same stories over and over. She can't remember simple things. Michael won't admit that his mother is declining, and I knew that if something dramatic didn't happen, he'd never see the truth. So you took it upon yourself to create a crisis?" "I took it upon myself to protect my family." That's when I spoke up. "Jessica, I am your family. I've been nothing but kind to you for 8 years. I've welcomed you into our lives. I've supported your marriage to my son. I've tried to build a relationship with you. And you repaid that kindness by systematically undermining me, documenting my every mistake, and then abandoning me in the middle of nowhere to prove a point." Jessica turned to me, and for the first time I saw real emotion in her eyes. But it wasn't remorse. It was anger. You want to know the truth, Margaret? The truth is that you are exhausting. You call us 3 times a day. You tell us the same stories every single time we see you. You ask the same questions over and over. You forget plans we've made. You forget conversations we've had. You forget things we've told you a dozen times. And Michael just pretends like it's normal, like it's not a problem. That's what families do, Jessica. We support each other through the challenges of aging. We don't abandon each other to prove a point. And what about my needs? What about my life? What about the fact that I can't have a normal marriage because my husband is constantly worried about his mother? What about the fact that we can't travel? We can't make plans? We can't even have a conversation without you calling to ask something you've already asked 5 times? The studio was completely silent. Rachel was letting Jessica dig her own grave, and Jessica was doing exactly that. You know what the worst part is? Jessica continued. You act like you're this sweet, innocent old lady, but you're manipulative too. You guilt-trip Michael constantly. You make him feel responsible for your loneliness, for your problems, for your happiness. At least I'm honest about what I did. You've been emotionally manipulating him for years. I felt like I'd been slapped, but I also felt a strange sense of clarity. This was who Jessica really was. This was what she really thought of me, of my relationship with my son, of my place in their lives. Jessica, I said, my voice steady, I lost my husband 2 years ago. My son is the most important person in my life. Yes, I call him often because I'm lonely. Yes, I sometimes repeat stories because I'm trying to connect with him. Yes, I sometimes forget things because I'm 73 years old and my brain doesn't work the way it used to. But I have never, ever tried to manipulate him or control his life. I've only tried to maintain a relationship with the child I raised and loved. Jessica laughed bitterly. You raised him to be codependent. You raised him to feel responsible for your emotional well-being. That's not love, Margaret. That's manipulation. And abandoning me at a rest stop is love? It's tough love. It's reality. It's showing him what his future looks like if he doesn't start setting boundaries with you. Rachel finally stepped back into the conversation. Jessica, do you understand that what you did could be considered elder abuse? Jessica's lawyer started to speak, but Jessica cut him off. No, I don't think it's elder abuse. I think it's a wake-up call. I think it's forcing a conversation that needed to happen. Margaret is not a victim here. She's a manipulative woman who has been using her age and her widowhood to control her son's life. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even confronted with the evidence of her own cruelty, Jessica was still trying to make me the villain. She was still trying to convince everyone that I was the problem. But then, something unexpected happened. Rachel played another recording. One I didn't know existed. It was Michael calling Jessica after he'd picked me up from the rest stop. Jessica, I found my mother. She's safe, thank God. But I need you to explain to me exactly what happened today, because her story doesn't match yours. Michael, I already told you. She got confused and wandered off. I spent hours looking for her. That's not what the security cameras show, Jessica. I talked to the staff at the rest stop. They have footage of you leaving her there. They have footage of you driving away while she stood there looking for you. There was a long pause on the recording. Then Jessica's voice, much quieter. Okay, fine. I left her there, but only for a little while. I wanted her to realize how vulnerable she is. You left my mother at a rest stop, in the dark, for 3 hours. I knew she'd be fine. There were people around. She could have been hurt. She could have been killed. She could have wandered onto the highway. But she wasn't. She was fine. And maybe now you'll finally see that she can't take care of herself. What I see is that my wife is capable of abandoning a 73-year-old woman to prove a point. What I see is that you've been lying to me for hours about what happened. What I see is that I don't know who you are anymore. The recording ended, and the studio was silent again. Jessica was staring at her hands. Her lawyer was whispering urgently in her ear, and Rachel was waiting for someone to speak. Finally, Jessica looked up at the camera. I want to apologize, she said. For a moment, I thought maybe she was actually going to show some remorse. Maybe she was going to acknowledge how wrong she'd been, how much she'd hurt me. I want to apologize for not handling this situation better. I should have talked to a professional about how to approach Margaret's declining mental state. I should have researched better ways to help her understand her limitations. I should have been more patient and more compassionate in my approach. I stared at her in disbelief. Even her apology was an attack on my mental capacity. But I don't apologize for trying to protect my husband from a situation that was becoming unsustainable. I don't apologize for trying to force a conversation about Margaret's care that needed to happen. And I don't apologize for refusing to enable a dynamic that was unhealthy for everyone involved. That's when I realized that Jessica was never going to admit what she'd really done. She was never going to acknowledge that she'd been wrong. She was going to twist this story until she was the hero, until she was the one who'd been trying to help, until I was the manipulative old woman who'd been taking advantage of her son's love. But I also realized something else. She'd already lost. By coming on television and doubling down on her justifications, by refusing to show any real remorse, by continuing to attack my mental state even when confronted with evidence of her own cruelty, she'd shown everyone exactly who she really was. Rachel wrapped up the interview by asking both of us what we wanted people to take away from our story. Jessica talked about the importance of having difficult conversations about aging and mental health, about the need for family members to be honest about their loved ones' declining abilities. When it was my turn, I looked directly into the camera and said, I want people to know that getting older doesn't make you less worthy of respect, kindness, and dignity. I want them to know that normal age-related memory changes don't make you incompetent or manipulative. And I want them to know that if someone in their life is systematically undermining them, documenting their every mistake and making them question their own reality, that's not love, that's abuse. The interview aired 2 days later. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people called the station, wrote letters, and posted on social media about their own experiences with family members who dismissed or mistreated them because of their age. The story was picked up by national news outlets, and suddenly I was hearing from people all over the country who'd experienced similar situations. But the most important response came from Michael. He called me the night the interview aired, and for the first time in months, he sounded like my son again. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I doubted you. I'm sorry I let Jessica convince me that you were the problem. I'm sorry I didn't protect you from her manipulation. I'm filing for divorce, and I want you to know that you will always be welcome in my life, no matter what." Jessica, on the other hand, doubled down. She went on other shows, talked to other reporters, and continued to insist that she'd been trying to help me. She claimed that I'd manipulated the situation, that I'd used my media connections to make her look bad, that I was proving her point about my manipulative nature. But public opinion was not on her side. The security footage from the rest stop had been released, and people could see for themselves what had really happened. They could see Jessica walking away from me, getting in her car, and driving off while I stood there looking confused and abandoned. The story became a cautionary tale about elder abuse, about the subtle ways family members can undermine and manipulate older adults, about the importance of listening to seniors when they say they're being mistreated. It sparked conversations about ageism, about the assumptions we make about older people's capabilities, about the responsibility we have to treat all family members with dignity and respect. 3 months later, Michael's divorce was finalized. He moved back home to help me with some projects around the house, and slowly, we rebuilt our relationship. He apologized repeatedly for the things Jessica had made him doubt about me, for the ways he'd started to question my competence and independence. "She was so convincing," he told me one day as we were planting flowers in my garden. "She made everything sound so reasonable. She'd point out when you repeated a story, and then she'd say things like, 'We need to keep an eye on this,' or 'Maybe we should talk to her doctor.' She made me feel like I was being a good son by doubting you." "That's how manipulation works," I told him. "It's not obvious, it's not dramatic, it's subtle and persistent, and it makes you question your own judgment." Jessica never did apologize. Not really. She moved back to her home state after the divorce, and as far as I know, she's never acknowledged that what she did to me was wrong. She still maintains that she was trying to help, that she was forced into drastic action by my manipulation and Michael's denial. But I learned something important from this experience. I learned that I'm stronger than I thought I was. I learned that I don't have to accept being dismissed or undermined just because I'm older. I learned that there are people who will listen to my story, who will believe me, who will stand up for me when I'm being treated unfairly. I also learned that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about the people who treat you with respect and kindness, who support you through difficult times, who see your worth regardless of your age or abilities. Jessica may have been my daughter-in-law, but she was never really family. The people who reached out to me after the interview, who shared their own stories, who offered support and encouragement, they became family. 6 months after the interview, I started a support group for older adults who've experienced family manipulation and abuse. We meet every Thursday at my church, and we talk about our experiences, share coping strategies, and support each other through difficult situations. The group has grown from just 3 people to over 20, and we've become a real community. I also started speaking at senior centers and community groups about the warning signs of elder abuse, about the importance of trusting your instincts when something doesn't feel right, about the resources available to help. It's become a mission of mine to make sure that other people don't have to go through what I went through. Michael and I are closer now than we've ever been. He's more protective of me, more aware of how others treat me, more willing to stand up for me when necessary. He's also learned to set healthy boundaries, not the kind Jessica wanted him to set, but real boundaries that protect both of us while maintaining our loving relationship. He's dating someone new now, a lovely woman named Sarah who treats me with genuine warmth and respect. She doesn't catalog my memory lapses or question my competence. She includes me in their plans, asks for my advice, and seems to genuinely enjoy my company. It's shown me what a healthy family dynamic looks like, and it's made me realize how toxic Jessica's behavior really was. As for Jessica, I heard through mutual friends that she's engaged to someone new. I hope for his sake, and for the sake of any older relatives he might have, that she's learned something from our experience. But I'm not holding my breath. The truth is, I'm grateful for what happened in a strange way. It was traumatic and painful, but it also showed me who I really am. It showed me that I'm not the confused, manipulative old woman Jessica tried to convince everyone I was. I'm a strong, capable person who deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. It also showed me the power of speaking up, of telling your story, of refusing to be silenced or dismissed. When I decided to go public with what Jessica had done to me, I never imagined the response I'd get. I never imagined that my story would resonate with so many people, that it would spark conversations about elder abuse and family manipulation. But I'm glad it did, because somewhere out there, there's probably someone else experiencing what I experienced. Someone whose family member is questioning their competence, documenting their mistakes, making them doubt their own reality. Someone who needs to know that they're not alone, that what's happening to them isn't okay, and that they have the right to fight back. To those people, I want to say this: trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is wrong. Don't let anyone convince you that you're too old, too confused, or too incompetent to know what's happening to you. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're a burden or a problem that needs to be solved. You are worthy of love, respect, and dignity at every age. You are not defined by your memory lapses or your physical limitations. You are not a problem to be managed or a burden to be endured. You are a human being with value, wisdom, and experiences that matter. And if someone in your life is treating you the way Jessica treated me, you don't have to accept it. You don't have to stay silent. You don't have to let them win. Fight back. Tell your story. Make sure people know what's really happening. Because the truth has a way of coming out eventually, and when it does, you want to be the one controlling the narrative. I never expected to become an advocate for elder rights at 73 years old. I never expected to be sharing my most painful experience with strangers on the internet. But life has a way of surprising us, of taking us in directions we never anticipated. Jessica thought she was going to prove that I was incompetent and manipulative. Instead, she proved that she was cruel and calculating. She thought she was going to get her way by abandoning me at that rest stop. Instead, she lost her marriage and her reputation. She thought she was going to silence me by making me question my own reality. Instead, she gave me the strongest voice I've ever had. So here I am, telling you this story, hoping that it helps someone else who might be going through something similar. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. If you've had a similar experience, please know that you're not alone. And if you're someone who's been dismissing or undermining an older person in your life, please think about the impact of your actions. We all get older, if we're lucky. We all face challenges with memory, with health, with independence. The way we treat older adults today sets the standard for how we'll be treated when we're older ourselves. I hope Jessica learned that lesson, but I'm not counting on it. Some people are so invested in their own narrative that they can't see the damage they're causing. Some people are so convinced of their own righteousness that they can't admit when they're wrong. But that's not my problem anymore. My problem was figuring out how to rebuild my life after being systematically torn down by someone who was supposed to love me. My problem was learning to trust my own perceptions again after months of being told I was confused and unreliable. The hardest part wasn't the night at the rest stop, though that was traumatic enough. The hardest part was the months afterward when I had to confront the possibility that maybe Jessica was right about some things. Maybe I was calling Michael too much. Maybe I was repeating stories. Maybe I was becoming a burden. I spent a lot of sleepless nights going over every interaction, every phone call, every visit. I analyzed my behavior with the same scrutiny Jessica had applied to it, looking for signs that I was losing my grip on reality. It's a terrible thing, to have your own mind turned against you, to question every thought and memory because someone has convinced you that you can't trust yourself. My doctor referred me to a neuropsychologist for a comprehensive evaluation. I wanted concrete proof that I was mentally competent, that Jessica's claims about my declining cognition were false. The testing took an entire day. Memory tests, problem-solving exercises, attention tasks, verbal fluency measures. It was exhausting, but necessary. The results were clear. I had normal, age-related cognitive changes, but no signs of dementia or significant impairment. My memory was actually above average for my age group. My problem-solving skills were intact. My judgment was sound. The neuropsychologist's report became one of my most treasured documents, concrete proof that I wasn't the confused, declining woman Jessica had portrayed me as. But even with that validation, the damage had been done. Jessica had planted seeds of doubt that took months to fully uproot. Every time I forgot where I put my keys, every time I told a story I'd told before, every time I had to ask someone to repeat something, I wondered if this was the beginning of the decline Jessica had predicted. It took therapy to help me understand that Jessica's behavior toward me had nothing to do with my actual abilities and everything to do with her own issues. My therapist, Dr. Patricia Williams, helped me recognize the patterns of emotional abuse I'd been subjected to, the way Jessica had systematically undermined my confidence and autonomy. What Jessica did to you is called gaslighting, Dr. Williams explained during one of our sessions. She made you question your own perceptions and memories by consistently contradicting them. She documented your normal human mistakes and presented them as evidence of decline. She isolated you from your support system, your son, by convincing him that you were the problem. Understanding that I'd been psychologically abused was both liberating and devastating. Liberating because it meant I wasn't crazy, I wasn't losing my mind, I wasn't the manipulative person Jessica had painted me as. Devastating because it meant someone I'd trusted, someone I'd welcomed into my family, had deliberately set out to destroy my sense of self. The therapy sessions were intense. I had to relive not just the day at the rest stop, but months of subtle manipulation and emotional abuse. I had to confront the ways I'd started to doubt myself, the ways I'd begun to modify my behavior to avoid Jessica's criticism. I'd stopped calling Michael as often, stopped sharing memories and stories, stopped asking for help when I needed it, all because I'd internalized Jessica's message that I was too needy, too much trouble, too demanding. Dr. Williams helped me understand that my desire to stay connected to my son wasn't pathological or manipulative. It was natural and healthy. She helped me see that there's nothing wrong with needing support and companionship as we age, that family relationships require ongoing nurturing and communication. The tragedy, she told me, is that Jessica saw your love for Michael as a threat to her marriage, when it could have been a source of strength. Healthy families expand to include new members. They don't contract by excluding existing ones. Through therapy, I also had to confront some uncomfortable truths about my own behavior. While Jessica's response was completely disproportionate and abusive, I did need to examine whether I'd been putting too much pressure on Michael, whether my grief over Robert's death had made me overly dependent on my son's attention and support. The answer was nuanced. Yes, I'd been struggling with loneliness and grief. Yes, I'd been relying heavily on Michael for emotional support. But these were normal responses to major life changes: the death of a spouse, the adjustment to living alone, the natural aging process. They weren't character flaws or signs of mental deterioration. What I needed wasn't to be abandoned at a rest stop or institutionalized. What I needed was compassion, understanding, and perhaps some additional support systems. I needed grief counseling, social activities, and ways to build a life that didn't revolve entirely around my relationship with Michael. So that's what I did. I joined a grief support group at my church, where I met other widows and widowers who understood the unique challenges of losing a life partner. I started volunteering at the local library, reading to children and helping with literacy programs. I took up watercolor painting, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for when I was working and raising a family. These activities gave me purpose and connection outside of my relationship with Michael. They reminded me that I was still a complete person, not just someone's mother or someone's burden. They helped me rebuild my confidence and sense of self-worth. The most surprising development was my relationship with social media. After the interview aired, I received hundreds of messages from people who'd watched it and wanted to share their own stories. I'd never been very active online before, but I found myself drawn to these connections with people who'd experienced similar situations. I started a blog called Still Here, Still Strong, where I wrote about aging, family relationships, and standing up to abuse. The response was overwhelming. People shared their own stories of being dismissed, manipulated, or mistreated by family members. They talked about the subtle ways ageism manifests in families, the assumptions people make about older adults' capabilities, the isolation that comes from being treated as a burden rather than a valued family member. The blog grew into a community. We shared resources, offered support, and celebrated each other's victories. When someone stood up to a manipulative family member, we cheered them on. When someone was struggling with self-doubt, we reminded them of their worth. When someone was facing a difficult situation, we brainstormed solutions together. It became clear that what happened to me wasn't an isolated incident. Elder abuse within families is far more common than most people realize, and it often takes subtle forms that are difficult to recognize and address. Financial manipulation, emotional abuse, social isolation, medical neglect — these are all ways that older adults can be mistreated by the very people who are supposed to love and protect them. One of the most powerful stories I received was from a woman named Dorothy, whose daughter had been slowly taking control of her finances and medical decisions. The daughter claimed she was helping, but Dorothy felt like she was losing her autonomy and independence. Sound familiar? I kept thinking maybe she was right, Dorothy wrote. Maybe I was getting too old to handle my own affairs. Maybe I should be grateful that she was taking care of everything. But reading your story made me realize that just because someone says they're helping doesn't mean they actually are. Dorothy ended up seeking legal advice and discovered that her daughter had been siphoning money from her accounts and had been telling her doctors that she was incompetent and couldn't make her own medical decisions. With legal support, Dorothy was able to regain control of her life and establish appropriate boundaries with her daughter. Another reader, James, told me about his son-in-law who had been systematically isolating him from his daughter and grandchildren. The son-in-law claimed that James was too negative and brought down the family's mood, so visits became less frequent and eventually stopped altogether. James had been blaming himself, thinking maybe he really was too pessimistic or demanding. "Your story helped me realize that I wasn't the problem," James wrote. "My son-in-law was using my normal reactions to aging and loss as weapons against me. He was making me feel guilty for being human." These stories reinforced what I'd learned through my own experience: that elder abuse often masquerades as concern or helpfulness, that victims are made to feel grateful for their mistreatment, that the isolation and self-doubt that result from abuse can be as damaging as the abuse itself. I also heard from younger people who recognized their own behavior in Jessica's story. Some of them were genuinely remorseful and wanted to make amends. Others were defensive, insisting that they really were trying to help their older relatives, that the older adults in their lives really were becoming burdens. To those people, I tried to offer compassion while also challenging their assumptions. Yes, caring for aging relatives can be stressful and challenging. Yes, there are legitimate concerns about safety and competence that need to be addressed. But there's a difference between genuine concern and manipulation, between offering help and taking control, between setting boundaries and abandoning someone at a rest stop. The key is respect. Are you treating your older relative like a human being with dignity and autonomy? Are you listening to their concerns and preferences? Are you involving them in decisions about their lives? Are you looking for ways to support their independence rather than undermine it? If you're documenting their every mistake, questioning their every decision, and building a case for their incompetence, you're not helping them. You're abusing them. And if you're abandoning them in dangerous situations to prove a point, you're not just abusing them, you're potentially putting their life at risk. A year after the interview, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from a producer at a major television network who wanted to do a follow-up story about elder abuse in families. They'd been tracking the response to my original interview and were impressed by the conversations it had started. "We want to do a special report on this issue," the producer explained. "We want to explore how common this type of abuse is, what signs families should look for, and what resources are available for victims. Would you be willing to participate?" I agreed, and the experience was completely different from my first television appearance. This time, I was prepared. I knew what questions to expect, I had my facts organized, and I had a clear message I wanted to convey. Most importantly, I wasn't reacting to Jessica's manipulations. I was proactively sharing my story to help others. The special report featured several other families who dealt with similar situations. There was a man whose daughter-in-law had convinced his son that he was unsafe to drive, even though his doctor had cleared him. There was a woman whose son had been telling people she had dementia when she didn't, using that false diagnosis to justify taking control of her finances. What struck me about all these stories was how similar the patterns were. The abusers always claimed they were acting out of love and concern. They always portrayed themselves as reluctant heroes who were forced to take drastic action. They always made their victims feel guilty for being difficult or burdensome. And in every case, the victims had started to doubt themselves, to question their own perceptions, to wonder if maybe they really were becoming incompetent or unreasonable. The psychological manipulation was remarkably consistent across different families and situations. The special report also featured experts who explained the psychology behind this type of abuse. Dr. Sarah Chen, a geropsychologist, explained how normal aging changes can be weaponized by manipulative family members. Aging involves some natural changes in memory, processing speed, and physical abilities, Dr. Chen explained. But these changes don't make someone incompetent or unable to make decisions about their own life. When family members catastrophize these normal changes, when they present them as evidence of decline or incompetence, they're engaging in a form of psychological abuse. The report also highlighted the legal and financial aspects of elder abuse. Attorney Michael Rodriguez explained how abusers often use claims of incompetence to justify taking control of their victims' finances, medical decisions, and living situations. The tragedy is that many of these cases never come to light, Rodriguez said. The victims are isolated, they're made to feel like they're the problem, and they often don't realize that what's happening to them is abuse. By the time someone intervenes, significant damage has already been done. The special report aired on a Sunday evening and reached millions of viewers. The response was even more overwhelming than my original interview. The network's website crashed from the volume of people trying to access resources about elder abuse. Support groups started forming in communities across the country. Legislators began drafting bills to strengthen protections for older adults. Most importantly, people started having conversations. Adult children began examining their own attitudes toward their aging parents. Older adults began recognizing signs of manipulation and abuse in their own families. Healthcare providers, social workers, and other professionals began receiving training on how to identify and respond to elder abuse. Jessica, predictably, was not pleased with the continued attention. She sent me a cease and desist letter through her lawyer, claiming that I was defaming her and causing her emotional distress. The letter demanded that I stop speaking publicly about our family dispute and remove all references to her from my blog and social media. My own lawyer's response was swift and decisive. Everything I'd said about Jessica was true and documented. I had security footage, recordings, and witnesses to back up my claims. Moreover, as a public figure, she'd made herself one by appearing on television. She had limited legal recourse against criticism. The cease and desist letter actually backfired on Jessica. News outlets picked up the story about her attempt to silence me, and it generated even more attention and sympathy for my cause. People were outraged that someone who'd abandoned a 73-year-old woman at a rest stop was now trying to silence her from speaking about it. Jessica eventually dropped her legal threats, but she continued to speak out whenever she could find a platform. She appeared on a few more talk shows, always maintaining that she'd been trying to help me, that I was manipulating the situation, that she was the real victim. But public opinion had solidified against her. People could see the security footage. They could hear the recordings. They could observe the pattern of behavior that had led up to the rest stop incident. Her attempts to rehabilitate her image only made her look more callous and manipulative. 2 years after the rest stop incident, I received an invitation that surprised me. The National Association of Adult Children of Aging Parents wanted me to speak at their annual conference. They were launching a new initiative to educate adult children about healthy versus unhealthy approaches to caring for aging parents. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was being invited to teach adult children how to avoid becoming like Jessica, how to support their aging parents without becoming manipulative or abusive, how to have difficult conversations about aging and care needs without resorting to cruelty or abandonment. I accepted the invitation and spent weeks preparing my presentation. I wanted to offer practical advice, not just share my story. I wanted to help families avoid the tragedy that had befallen mine. The presentation was titled, "Love Without Manipulation: Supporting Aging Parents While Maintaining Healthy Boundaries." I talked about the difference between genuine concern and controlling behavior, between offering help and taking over, between setting boundaries and abandoning responsibilities. I shared strategies for having difficult conversations about aging, safety, and care needs. I emphasized the importance of including the aging parent in decisions about their own life, of respecting their autonomy and dignity, of finding ways to support their independence rather than undermine it. I also talked about the warning signs that family members might be crossing the line from supportive to abusive. If you're documenting your parents' every mistake, if you're questioning their competence based on normal aging changes, if you're isolating them from others or making them doubt their own perceptions, you're not helping them, you're harming them. The response from the audience was incredible. Many people approached me afterward to share their own struggles with caring for aging parents. Some admitted that they'd been exhibiting some of the warning signs I'd discussed. Others said they'd been on the receiving end of treatment similar to what I'd experienced. But what struck me most was the genuine desire people had to do better, to be better. They wanted to support their aging parents without becoming manipulative or controlling. They wanted to address legitimate concerns about safety and competence without resorting to abuse or abandonment. One woman told me about her mother, who had been diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment. The woman had been struggling with how to balance her mother's desire for independence with her own concerns about safety. "I've been so focused on what my mother can't do anymore that I've forgotten to appreciate what she can still do," the woman said. "Your presentation helped me realize that I need to support her strengths, not just manage her weaknesses." Another man shared that he'd been growing increasingly frustrated with his father's repetitive stories and questions. He'd been responding with impatience and irritation, making his father feel bad for being forgetful. "I never thought of it as abuse," he said. "But you're right. Making someone feel bad for normal aging changes is a form of cruelty. I need to find more patience and compassion." These conversations reminded me why I'd started speaking out in the first place. It wasn't about revenge against Jessica, or even about getting recognition for what I'd been through. It was about preventing other families from going through the same tragedy, about helping people understand that there are loving, respectful ways to navigate the challenges of aging. The presentation was so well received that I was invited to speak at other conferences and events. I developed a series of workshops for adult children of aging parents, for healthcare providers, for senior center staff, for anyone who works with older adults. Each presentation was different, tailored to the specific audience and their needs, but the core message was always the same. Older adults deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their limitations or challenges. They deserve to be included in decisions about their own lives, to have their autonomy respected, to be supported rather than controlled. I also started working with local law enforcement to help them recognize signs of elder abuse. Many officers had never received training on this issue, and they often dismissed reports of family mistreatment as family disputes rather than recognizing them as potential crimes. The training sessions were eye-opening for everyone involved. Officers learned about the subtle forms that elder abuse can take, the psychological tactics that abusers use, the reasons why victims often don't report or seek help. They learned how to interview older adults who might be reluctant to discuss family problems, how to recognize signs of manipulation and coercion, how to connect victims with resources and support services. One officer told me that the training had completely changed how he responded to calls involving older adults. I used to think that if someone wasn't being physically hurt, it wasn't really abuse, he said. Now I understand that emotional and psychological abuse can be just as damaging, and sometimes more so. The work was emotionally demanding, but incredibly rewarding. Every person I trained, every audience I spoke to, every workshop I conducted was a step toward preventing another family from experiencing what mine had gone through. But the most meaningful part of my advocacy work was the direct contact with other survivors. Through my blog, my speaking engagements, and the support groups I'd helped establish, I met hundreds of people who'd experienced similar situations. There was Margaret, yes, we shared the same name, whose son had been gradually taking control of her life under the guise of helping her. There was Robert, whose daughter had been spreading rumors about his mental competence to justify excluding him from family events. There was Susan, whose daughter-in-law had been intercepting her mail and screening her phone calls to protect her from confusion. Each story was unique, but the patterns were remarkably similar. The abusers always claimed they were acting out of love and concern. They always portrayed their victims as confused, manipulative, or burdensome. They always made their victims feel guilty for being difficult or demanding. And in every case, the victims had been made to doubt themselves, to question their own perceptions, to wonder if maybe they really were becoming incompetent or unreasonable. The psychological manipulation was devastatingly effective, but sharing our stories with each other was healing. We validated each other's experiences, reminded each other of our worth, and supported each other through the difficult process of rebuilding our lives and relationships. We also learned from each other. Someone who'd successfully set boundaries with a manipulative family member would share their strategies. Someone who'd found effective legal representation would provide referrals. Someone who'd rebuilt their confidence and independence would offer hope to those who were still struggling. The support group I'd started at my church had grown into a network of groups across the state. We held monthly meetings, organized social activities, and provided resources and referrals for people who needed additional help. We also became advocates for policy changes. We testified before state legislative committees about the need for stronger elder abuse laws. We worked with adult protective services to improve their response to reports of family mistreatment. We partnered with healthcare providers to develop better screening tools for identifying abuse. The work was slow and sometimes frustrating, but we were making progress. Laws were being strengthened, training programs were being developed, and awareness was growing about the reality of elder abuse within families. 3 years after the rest stop incident, I received a call that brought everything full circle. It was from a woman named Jennifer, whose mother-in-law had been abandoned at a shopping mall by her daughter-in-law as a lesson about her declining abilities. "I saw your interview," Jennifer said. "I saw what happened to you, and I knew I had to help my mother-in-law. She's been blaming herself, thinking maybe she really is becoming a burden. But after hearing your story, I realized that what happened to her was abuse, not help." Jennifer had contacted me because she wanted to know how to support her mother-in-law, how to help her recognize that she wasn't the problem, how to connect her with resources and support. She keeps saying she doesn't want to cause trouble, that maybe her daughter-in-law was right about her needing supervision, Jennifer explained. But she's a sharp, capable woman who's just experienced a traumatic betrayal. How do I help her see that? I spent an hour on the phone with Jennifer, sharing resources and strategies, connecting her with support groups in her area, and helping her understand the psychology of what her mother-in-law was experiencing. The most important thing is to believe her, I told Jennifer. Don't minimize what happened or make excuses for the person who hurt her. Validate her experience, remind her of her strengths, and help her understand that she deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. A few weeks later, Jennifer called back to update me. Her mother-in-law had joined a support group, was working with a therapist, and was beginning to rebuild her confidence and sense of self-worth. She'd also reported the incident to Adult Protective Services and was considering legal action. She said to tell you thank you, Jennifer said. She said that hearing your story gave her permission to be angry about what happened to her, to stop blaming herself, and to start fighting back. That phone call reminded me why I'd started this work in the first place. It wasn't about my own healing or recovery, though that had been important too. It was about making sure that other people didn't have to go through what I'd gone through, or if they did, that they'd know they weren't alone and that help was available. As I write this, it's been 4 years since Jessica left me at that rest stop. 4 years since I discovered what it feels like to be truly abandoned by someone who was supposed to love me. 4 years since I learned that family members can be capable of breathtaking cruelty while convincing themselves they're being helpful. But it's also been 4 years of growth, healing, and purpose. 4 years of connecting with other survivors, of sharing resources and support, of working to prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedies. My relationship with Michael has never been stronger. We've learned to communicate more openly, to set healthy boundaries, and to support each other through life's challenges. He's married now, to Sarah, the woman I mentioned earlier, and they're expecting their first child. I'm going to be a grandmother for the first time at 77, and I couldn't be more excited. Sarah has been a revelation. She treats me like a valued member of the family, not a burden to be managed. She asks for my advice about parenting, includes me in their plans, and genuinely enjoys spending time with me. She's shown me what a healthy daughter-in-law relationship looks like, and it's made me realize just how toxic Jessica's treatment of me really was. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed silent about what Jessica did to me, if I'd accepted her version of events, if I'd let her convince everyone that I was the problem, if I'd quietly disappeared into the background of my son's life. I probably would have ended up in the care facility Jessica wanted me in, not because I needed to be there, but because I would have lost confidence in my own abilities. I would have internalized her message that I was incompetent and burdensome, and I would have stopped fighting for my independence and autonomy. Instead, I fought back. I told my story. I refused to be silenced or dismissed, and in doing so, I not only reclaimed my own life, but also helped countless other people reclaim theirs. The work continues. Elder abuse within families is still a widespread problem that's often invisible and underreported. Victims are still being made to feel like they're the problem, that they're too demanding or difficult or burdensome. But conversations are happening. Awareness is growing. Resources are being developed. And most importantly, survivors are finding their voices and sharing their stories. To anyone who's reading this and recognizing their own experience in my story, I want you to know that you're not alone. What's happening to you is not your fault. You deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of your age or abilities. You have the right to make decisions about your own life. You have the right to be included in conversations about your care and support. You have the right to maintain relationships and social connections. You have the right to be treated as a whole person, not just a collection of problems to be managed. And if someone in your life is making you feel like you don't deserve these things, if they're documenting your every mistake and questioning your every decision, if they're making you doubt your own perceptions and memories, then they're not helping you. They're abusing you. It's not too late to fight back. It's not too late to tell your story. It's not too late to reclaim your life and your dignity. You are still here. You are still strong. And you still matter. Thank you for listening to my story. If it's helped you in any way, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing this, please share it with them. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is let someone know they're not alone. Together we can make sure that no one else has to experience what I experienced at that rest stop. Together, we can create families and communities where aging is met with compassion and respect, not manipulation and abuse. Together, we can make sure that every older adult knows they are valued, they are loved, and they are never truly alone.